Other nurserymen were left gasping at the feat, which not only produced a $6,000 windfall for Burbank, but taught him that mass production was one of the keys of prodding out of nature secrets she was normally unwilling to give up. Thus began Burbank's pomological revolution, which led to the development of new prunes and plums, including one, the climax, which tasted like a pineapple, and another which tasted like a pear, that today still account for over half of California's giant crop. The ever-popular Burbank July Alberta peach, a luscious Burbank flaming gold nectarine, a bush-type chestnut which bore a crop 6 months after its seed was put in the ground, a white blackberry the color of an icicle, and 2 quinces that were so good that most nurseries still stock no other. In developing new fruit, Burbank was so adept and fast that he could race through thousands of cross-pollinations while orthodox plant specialists in laboratories were pedantically poring over sheaves of notes involving only a few dozen. It was no wonder that the schoolmen increasingly accused him of trickery, mainly of buying his new creations abroad. For Burbank, convinced that plants, like people, would behave differently when away from home, would order, from as far away as Japan and New Zealand, experimental varieties to cross with homegrown standbys. Burbank introduced over 1,000 new plants, which, if evenly spaced over his working career, would have amounted to a never-before-seen specimen every 3 weeks. Despite the backbiting cavils from envious and narrow-minded scientists, this miracle-making was heralded by professional experts big enough to recognize genius when they saw it, even if it passed their understanding. Liberty Hyde Bailey, the universally recognized dean of American botany, who had earlier told a World Horticultural Congress that man could not do much to produce variations in plants, came from Cornell University to see what Burbank was doing to create such a furor. He left Santa Rosa stupefied, and wrote the same year in an issue of World's Work magazine. Luther Burbank is a breeder of plants by profession, and in this business he stands almost alone in this country. So many and so striking have been the new plants that he has given to the world that he has been called the wizard of horticulture. This sobriquet has so prejudiced a good many people against his work. Luther Burbank is not a wizard. He is an honest, straightforward, careful, inquisitive, and persistent man. He believes that causes produce results. He has no other magic than that of patient inquiry, abiding enthusiasm, an unprejudiced mind, and a remarkably acute judgment of the merits and capabilities of plants. This was a delight to Burbank, who smarted from the ugly rumors circulated about his work in the halls of academe. He told a packed lecture hall at Stanford University that orthodoxy is ankylosis. Nobody at home, ring up the undertaker for further information. Professor H.J. Weber, a geneticist in charge of plant breeding at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, maintained that Burbank had single-handedly saved the world nearly a quarter of a century in plant breeding time. David Fairchild, who spent years exploring the world for new plants which might prove commercially useful in the United States, though baffled by Burbank's methods, summed up his impressions of his visit to Santa Rosa in a letter to a friend. There are those who say Burbank is not scientific. It is true only in the sense that he has tried to do so much, and has been so fascinated by the desire to create, that he has not always noted and labeled the footsteps which he has taken. Just watching Burbank at work took the breath away from countless observers. On his experimental farm in nearby Sebastopol, where 40,000 Japanese plums, or 250,000 flowering bulbs could be seen growing at the same time, Burbank would walk down a row of thousands of plants, whether tiny seedlings just breaking ground, or chest-high flowers nearing maturity, and without breaking stride, pick out those likely to succeed. One wide-eyed county farm advisor described this in his own words. He'd go along a row of gladioli, yanking out the ones he didn't want as fast as he could pull them up. He seemed to have an instinct that told him if a tiny plant would grow up to bear the kind of fruit or flowers he wanted. I couldn't see any difference between them, even if I stooped and looked closely, but Burbank did no more than glance at them. Burbank's catalogs described his results in such a way that readers could imagine he had thousands of workers and several genies helping him. 6 new gladioli, the best of 1,000,000 seedlings. The growing of 10,000 hybrid clematis plants for several years to get a final 6 good ones. Discarding 18,000 calla lilies in order to get 1 plant. My royal walnut can outgrow ordinary walnuts 8 to 1 and promises to revolutionize the furniture business and also perhaps the cordwood industry. When, on the 18th day of April 1906, the same earthquake which all but devastated San Francisco reduced Santa Rosa to a mass of flaming splinters and rubble, the overwhelmed citizens were further stunned that not a pane of glass in Burbank's huge greenhouse, not far from the center of town, was even cracked. Burbank was less amazed than his fellow townsmen, though careful not to broach the subject directly in public, surmising that his communing with the forces of nature and the cosmos and his success with plants might well have protected his greenhouse. His indirect allusions to the personalization of his plants are illustrated by an article he wrote in 1906 for Century magazine. The most stubborn living things in this world, the most difficult to swerve, he asserted, is a plant once fixed in certain habits. Remember that this plant has preserved its individuality all through the ages. Perhaps it is one which can be traced backwards through eons of time in the very rocks themselves. Do you suppose, after all these ages of repetition, the plant does not become possessed of a will, if you so choose to call it, of unparalleled tenacity? To Manly P. Hall, founder and president of the Philosophical Research Society of Los Angeles, and a student of comparative religion, mythology, and esoterica, Burbank revealed that when he wanted his plants to develop in some particular and peculiar way not common to their kind, he would get down on his knees and talk to them. Burbank also mentioned that plants have over 20 sensory perceptions, but, because they are different from ours, we cannot recognize them. He was not sure, wrote Hall, that the shrubs and flowers understood his words, but he was convinced that by some telepathy they could comprehend his meaning. Hall later confirmed what Burbank told the famous yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda, about his development of the spineless cactus, a years-long procedure during which Burbank at first had to pull thousands of cactus thorns from his hands with pliers, though in the end the cacti grew without thorns. While I was conducting my experiments with cacti, said Burbank, I often talked to the plants to create a vibration of love. You have nothing to fear, I would tell them. You don't need your defensive thorns. I will protect you. Burbank's power of love, reported Hall, greater than any other, was a subtle kind of nourishment that made everything grow better and bear fruit more abundantly. Burbank explained to me that in all his experimentation, he took plants into his confidence, asked them to help, and assured them that he held their small lives in the deepest regard and affection. Helen Keller, deaf and blind, after a visit to Burbank, wrote in Outlook for the Blind, he has the rarest of gifts, the receptive spirit of a child. When plants talk to him, he listens. Only a wise child can understand the language of flowers and trees. Her observation was particularly apt, since all his life Burbank loved children. In his essay, Training of the Human Plant, later published as a book, he anticipated the more humane attitudes of a later day and shocked authoritarian parents by saying, it is more important for a child to have a good nervous system than to try to force it along the line of book knowledge, at the expense of its spontaneity, its play. A child should learn through a medium of pleasure, not pain. Most of the things that are really useful in later life come to the children through play and through association with nature. Burbank, like other geniuses, realized that his successes came from having conserved the exuberance of a small boy and his wonder for everything around him. He told one of his biographers, I am almost 77, and I can still go over a gate or run a foot race or kick the chandelier. That's because my body is no older than my mind, and my mind is adolescent. It has never grown up, and I hope it never will. It was this quality which so puzzled the dour scientists who looked askance at his power of creation and bedeviled audiences who expected him to be explicit as to how he produced so many horticultural wonders. Most of them were as disappointed as the members of the American Pomological Society gathered to hear Burbank tell all during a lecture entitled How to Produce New Fruits and Flowers, who sat agape as they heard him say, in pursuing the study of any of the universal and everlasting laws of nature, whether relating to the life, growth, structure, and movements of a giant planet, the tiniest plant, or of the psychological movements of the human brain, some conditions are necessary before we can become one of nature's interpreters or the creator of any valuable work for the world. Preconceived notions, dogmas, and all personal prejudice and bias must be laid aside. Listen patiently, quietly, and reverently to the lessons, one by one, which Mother Nature has to teach, shedding light on that which was before a mystery, so that all who will may see and know. She conveys her truths only to those who are passive and receptive. Accepting these truths as suggested, wherever they may lead, then we have the whole universe in harmony with us. At last man has found a solid foundation for science, having discovered that he is part of a universe which is eternally unstable in form, eternally immutable in substance. Had he known of Fechner, Burbank would have agreed with him, that it is a dark and cold world we sit in if we will not open the inward eyes of the spirit to the inward flame of nature. Chapter 9. Wizard of Tuskegee.